You're advocating a system that is morally unjust because you take away the sweat of people's own work, their talent, their labor, their ability, their individuality, and you homogenize people by saying that everyone needs to be equalized on all outcomes because there's no such thing as private property. So I guess I don't have a problem talking about the rights of it. I think we started off trying to talk about the effects of, you said about the current system that we have has been so great. Things have gotten so much better, even though there are problems you could criticize. Then we tried to get into what your system was, which basically was undefinable. But that's okay. We could talk about the principles behind these things and the morality. That's absolutely fine. So I guess it starts with sort of defining sort of libertarianism, which I did as, personal freedom and some responsibility, or defining capitalism, which is basically just an economic system that says that the means of production is driven by private ownership, private property. That's the fundamental difference between communism and capitalism. For example, socialism says that governments own the means of production. Communism takes it a step further and says, and there is no such thing as private property. Now, we really don't have any effective socialist societies today. Even societies that we consider more socialist, like the Scandinavian countries, will be quick to tell you we have private property. The government doesn't own the total means of production. We just have higher tax rates. That's all. But that's still a capitalist system, right? And we could talk about, what sort of tax structure we should have and things like that. You keep saying that, like, well, if we advance the ideas of capitalism or advance the ideas of individuality or private property and things like that, that means that we don't care about people's lives. It couldn't be further from the truth, right? You're advocating a system that is morally unjust because you take away the sweat of people's own work, their talent, their labor, their ability, their individuality, and you homogenize people by saying that everyone needs to be equalized on all outcomes because there's no such thing as private property. I want to maximize individuality. The only way we could have morality is by maximizing individuality and having people make personal choices of their own free will, not a collective state actor. And so not only is your framework and the framework of communism immoral by being of such great theft to people and equalizing everyone, and so the people that work hardest, like in your system, other than some marginal benefits, which we don't really know what it would be, what happens is the person that busts their ass and does something good for society is basically living a life equal to the person that says, I ain't doing shit. I'm just going to sit around and do nothing. Right. And you take the labor, the wealth, and the goodwill that person that's working hard did, and you equalize it out to the people that aren't doing anything. That's immoral. And we can also see that those systems fail and they end up being worse for the very people that you claim they'll be helping.
Okay, so there's two ways you could run a system. One, you could run a system that says, hey, look, I am afraid. Okay, so like I want to make sure there's no freeloaders. I want to make sure everybody goes to work and does their, does whether or not, they want to, fuck them, they're lazy, set them to work. Or you could have a system that's like, hey, you know what? Billionaires shouldn't exist. Fuck billionaires. I'm going to, take their money and give it to other people. Why would you, why would you say you're inclined to be like, no, Paul, you're, I want people to work. Okay, fine. But who do you care about more? You could design a system, say, something along the lines of communism, where you actually don't have to work. Work is a choice for everybody. And how do you do that? Well, you make sure that rich people don't exist. People who don't want to work, hold on. People who don't want to work could be could be convinced to work, not forced to work. Right now, under our current system, if you do not work, you will go hungry and die. That's immoral, right? Even if you're lazy, that shouldn't be a death sentence. It's immoral to kill lazy people. I'm just telling you. I'm not going to kill rich people. You want to kill lazy people indirectly. I would rather have a system where employers, if you're going to have them, have to make the workplace hospitable enough and the pay good enough, or the benefits, however you want to, define it, depending on where we are in our communist state evolution, make it good enough or worthwhile enough to work. So a socialist system or a /communist system by its nature is non-coercive in that way. You have to make it good to work, not a threat of death for the benefit of billionaires.
Okay, so there's a couple things to unpack here. First, the system that you're saying the status quo is does not exist. I go back to the unchallenged information I had that with capitalist systems, we've seen the amount of people in crippling poverty decline from over 90% to about 9%. So there are less people starving under this system. Secondly, in our current system, it's just not true that if you choose not to work, we just leave you starved to death on the street. There are all sorts of programs, government programs and charity that mean that even people that don't work, in fact, we only have like what 61% labor participation in this country, and there aren't that many people starving in this country. There are people that are malnourished, and there are people that have poverty, and that's certainly something that we should always strive to make better. But the best system we have is sort of a capitalist society, mixed economy that has social safety nets. That's the best thing we've been able to come up with. The attempts at communism has led to more people starving. I direct you to the Ukraine with 3.9.
So should we raise the minimum wage? Should we raise the minimum wage?
I mean, it's a completely different debate. Like raising do you mean federally raise the minimum wage?
Well, I'm talking about, okay, so if you are interested in helping the over 1 million people who are homeless in America, and instead of just hand waving them off, how would you do it? I was sort of skipping to the
again, right? So this is a massive debate. So for example, federally raising minimum wage, no, I wouldn't do that. I think it's a huge mistake. For example, you could laugh. How much do you pay for rent a month?
A lot.
Yeah, you know how much I paid before I owned a house? $300 a month. You know what the local mom and pop store down the road paid? $8 an hour. $8 an hour probably wouldn't cut it in the area where you're at, but in the area where I'm at, $8 an hour would allow. No, if you let me finish, $8 an hour would allow you to rent that place because property values are less. You'd be able to rent that place and be able to exist easily. If you raise the minimum wage to say $20 an hour, that mom and pop business is completely out of business, but the Dollar General right next to it, they'll be able to afford it. Now, what they'll do inevitably is use technology to drive people out of work, or they'll lower people's hours so they don't have to pay them as much and stuff like that. And so what you'll see is that raise of minimum wage in my specific area, because it was tailored to places more like where you live, ends up having the exact opposite effect of what you wanted. It puts the small mom and pop business out of work. It will mean that the big corporation like Dollar General would be able to have a monopoly, which then they'll be able to raise their prices, which will negatively affect everyone in the area. Nonetheless, the question of raising minimum wage has nothing to do with communism. Nothing.
Okay.
You're talking about a cashless society. Go ahead. I mean, this is what's so frustrating. Okay. You're making a bunch of.
Just hold on a second. It has to do with the brain cancer that has like engulfed the right. Like I only asked you because I wanted to hear if you were going to say no, fuck workers, and here's my big brain reason why. There is no reason to not give people a higher. If you want to reward hard work, you can either adopt socialism/communism, right? You could do it my way, or you could do it your way, and you could at least pay people more. They still get screwed, but you could pay them more. But you're like, no, dog. I want to, I personally was able to live for $300 a month. So, you have to move where I live to be able
Did I say that? Can you name one thing inaccurate with what I just said there? Do you have any what was wrong about what I said?
Every econometric study out there says that raising the minimum wage to $15, even higher, would not cause any more unemployment, and would in fact lift millions of people above the poverty line. So if you are actually interested in making people less poverty stricken, you would at the very least advocate for something like a higher minimum wage, and not doing so is immoral.
Okay, so the very studies that you're talking about, would those economists that are doing that, I would be interested to hear what they would have to say about full-blown communism and what that would do to the standard of living of people. Secondly, you're just factually wrong that every study out there says something not true. You have not read every study. I would be shocked and amazed if you've read one study, let alone every. But neither here nor there. The reality of what I just told you is true. You could talk to the small business owner that owns the store in this town that it's told me straight up that if they had to go from paying people $8 an hour. The people that owned it, they actually sold it, but the people that owned it were actually immigrants from South Africa, I believe they were. And they were not making money. They had retired. So they were basically breaking even. And they did it as a hobby because it was like the old Cracker Barrel type thing. They got to know people in the community by offering services at this mom and pop shop. So they're not getting extremely wealthy. And they're paying basically young people what they can afford. And these young people are able to use that and get their first apartment and things like that. They would immediately go out of business. I don't give a shit what you say that some economist paper says in this particular situation. Right. In this particular situation, in this particular community, it is clear that a one-size-fits-all approach of a mandatory increase in minimum wage of that significance would be a disaster for them in that situation. Nonetheless, it's obfuscating from the debate we're having right now, which is supposed to be on sort of the values that you said you wanted to talk about of communism versus sort of capitalism or libertarian values. And again, there's really like, I just want to say, and before we got off on this tangent about minimum wage, you could see this sort of fairy tale utopia that people end up defaulting to that are advocating these forms of communism, where they say, well, you shouldn't have to work. I mean, if you don't want to work, then you don't have to work. And we'll have a system where you don't have to work. And, you know, like, it's just not reality that people would say, you know what, I'm going to go dig ditches today. I'm going to go be a janitor. I'm going to clean shit pits at the farm. That's what I'm going to do. Now, if I do it, I get no benefit, none whatsoever, other than the sweat of my brow. That's all I get. But I'm still going to get my mandatory rations. I'm still going to get my mandatory shelter over my head. And if I don't want to do it, that's fine.